Okay, it's the 3rd of July 2021. It's the 50th anniversary of Jim Morrison's passing, the great Lizard King, Mr. Mojo Rising, very much recognised and associated with 60s American counterculture. I'm very honoured and privileged to be in the company of a man who lived through all of that and more. But today, we're going to talk about his experience and meeting with Jim Morrison and the Doors in relation to promoting them originally and then being asked to be their manager by the great Ray Manzarek. Thanks very much for giving us your time, Vincent. Do you want to just delve straight in and how did it all come about? How did you end up on the road with the Doors, a young man from Dublin?
I didn't quite end up on the road with them. They came on the road to me because I signed 4 contracts that they would perform 4 concerts in a town in Central California called Merced and Turlock and Modesto. I was advised by one of the students in the local high school who helped me organize my dances and concerts that she'd heard of a group playing at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. And I remember her telling me, VJ, you have to bring them to Merced. So I went down to Los Angeles. I located their agent, and I remember going into the plush hall of 16th floor of the giant Capitol building, and at this point they were only known locally in Los Angeles, but because of the request from Jamie Murdoch, I signed them up for 4 gigs over about a 2.5 month period. The first time to play in the town I lived in, which was Merced, about 60,000 people, and the first time they played, they drew 82 people, 81, 81 I think, 81. Let's not exaggerate, because nobody had heard of them. Yeah. I remember being out in the ticket office selling the few tickets of admission of $1.50 to get in, and hearing them in the background and thinking, oh my God, this is something else. The sounds that were coming across the floor. And so they played their first gig, and they came back to a town north of Merced, in the Veterans Hall, and they played there. Then they came back to Merced for the second time, and when I was driving the 4 of them to their motel in Merced, the 3 of the members of the band were in the back seat, and Ray Manzarek was in the passenger seat. And out of the blue, he said, would you like to be our manager? And I didn't fully understand what was entailed in that. And of course, also, it must be remembered, I didn't realize the greatness of the people whose company I was in, at least who were going to become world famous. I knew they were good, but to me, they probably were just another band. I'd brought in Janis Joplin, the Young Rascals, the Animals, Sam the Sham, the Pharaohs, Bo Diddley, on and on. I brought these in prior to this request from Jamie Murdoch. And so I said, why, what do you want me to be your manager for? And Ray Manzarek said, well, words, as I recall, something along the line of, you appear to be an honest man, and Jim, who was in the back seat talking to the other members of the band, said Jim really needs a father figure. Obviously, when I think about that particular line from Ray Manzarek, it was obvious that Ray was becoming aware that Jim Morrison was in trouble with showing up for gigs and showing up for practices and recordings because of his drinking. He started off with vodka, most primarily, rather than hard drugs. And he said, in the course of the conversation, well, it was a one-way conversation, he did all the talking. He said something along, if we don't find something soon to manage him and to manage the doors, he'll be dead within 7 years, 6 years. It was either 6 or 7. And I drove on, got to their motel, and as I pulled up to the motel, I said, I tell you what, Ray, give me the next time I see you will be up the road a few weeks from now, and I'll give you my answer then as to whether I will accept the management or not. I just got out of the Air Force and was starting my third level education in Merced Junior College, and then going on to Fresno, California State. And so I thought about it, and it would have meant quitting university, and I realized then I wanted to be a teacher. I was 27 years of age, and I came and said, no, I can't do it. Of course, we always wonder about the ifs in life. What if, if you play theatre of the mind with that thought, would I have been able to control them, for the want of a better word? Would I have been able to keep the group dependable, responsible, and what have you? And as it turned out, of course, he barely lived the 6 years, and when he was found dead in the bathtub, famously in Paris. As to Jim Morrison himself, something I didn't say earlier, but let me just read the 2 or 3 lines from the music history of the United States in the 60s, just 3 to 4 lines. Popular music of the United States in the 1960s became innately tied up into causes opposing certain ideas, influenced by the sexual revolution, feminism, black power, environmentalists, and the gay rights movement. This trend took place in a tumultuous period of massive public unrest in the United States, which consisted of the Cold War, Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. The 60s in America, to a great degree, there were tanks in front of the White House and machine guns on the rooftop of the White House. Anarchy was beginning to take over the country. At one point, 30 cities were in flames after the death of Martin Luther King. Bobby Kennedy died 6 months later, and so the country was in a state of, to use Sean O'Casey's word, a state of chassis. And when I think of the one major conversation I had with Jim Morrison, and I had more conversations with Manserick, but when I think of him, I don't think he, have we talked about his desire to be seen as a poet?
No, just basically what you felt about it. Yeah, we kind of touched on that.
Well, I think it was the most insightful thing that maybe I can contribute, which was, if you put yourself in any role in life, and you feel that your family, your neighbours, your friends, your fellow citizens perceive you totally differently, it's a very, very jarring experience, to put it mildly. If you see yourself on a certain track, but you're perceived by society, and so he saw himself as a poet, and a good poet at that, but society saw him as a sex object. So that is why we now know for certain he didn't actually expose himself in Miami, but he unzipped his trousers. And the purpose was, in his own words, I wanted the audience to see, if they saw me as a sex object, okay, here I am, here's my penis, look at it. But I'm showing you this out of disgust and anger. I really want to be seen as a poet, which he was. And it was interesting when Manserich said, you seem to be an honest person. He said seemed, because the whole industry, if ever there's an inappropriate song, it's a song there's no business, like show business. Yeah. One of the reasons I got into, there's several reasons, but one of the reasons I got into the putting on concerts and dances was because of Battle of the Bands. They were put on, they'd bring in 6 or 8 bands, make loads of money from the Battle of the Bands, and give a trophy to the winner. And I just thought that was absolutely disgraceful. The exploitation of young people and giving them, thinking they're going to get records made of them. So in some cases they did make records for them, but the only point was that the records never got into the DJ's parameters. They never got played on the radio. So what, you have a record made but it never got played. So it was enormous exploitation from my point of view. And I thought also the anti-war sentiment to bring young people together to listen to not a perfect escape, but an alternative escape from the reality of war and racism and sexism and ageism and homophobia. This was a good little outlet that I could at least have some input to.
Yeah. So as you said, you met Bo Diddley, Janis Joplin, and many more. But what was it about Morrison that interested you?
He didn't come out as a savior.
Yeah.
The others came out as, many of them came out as, follow me. I have a microphone. I have a platform.
Yeah.
Jim Morrison came across as if he was somewhat indifferent to the societal problems that existed at the time. But if you read his poetry, his songs, you see that he had an enormous in-depth insight, great depth as to the problems that were coming about because of all of these ills that were bubbling forth. Simply put, the 60s, the people in the dance promotion business were not nice people. They were using the music industry to make big money, to make enormous money. And of course, once the few who did make it to the top were able to put on concerts and charge $100 a head to get into, then the artist did get some just reward. But the exploitation of all of those who never got a decent paycheck for nice work was very sad from my point of view.
You had him for 4. Did you actually have an interaction with Morrison?
Once, that I would call an interaction. I mean, I don't know if I've told you this, but they didn't show up for the 4th concert.
Yeah.
They just didn't show up.
Was that an account of you refusing to manage?
No, because by the fourth concert,
yeah.
they were totally in demand nationwide.
Yes.
They'd gone on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah.
And once you got on the Ed Sullivan Show, you were top of Variety magazine. So at that stage, they were climbing up the ladder to the Ed Sullivan Show. And the one conversation I had with them was, strangely, in a clothing store in San Francisco, where I was in there with some students who wanted to buy hippy-dippy clothes, and I met him there. And so I asked him a couple of times about his life, and Ray Manserich kind of pulled him away from me, because he knew that I was going to tell him, you know, you got to change your way if you want to live a long life. But when he was the last time when he was in the car, I asked him something silly, but when I look back on it, it wasn't that silly. I said to him, do you realize you're very popular with the teenagers across America? Which was self-evident he was.
Yeah.
And he said something to the effect, yes, I am, but they like me for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
And that, of course, tied in with Miami.
Right.
So I think he took.
He was a sex symbol, though. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah, but he didn't.
And he was portrayed as a sex symbol.
He didn't want.
But when
to
he went like
that,
when he put his arms outstretched and the beaded necklace, you know, what image did he want to portray, or was he like basically that's the same photo shoot where he has the iconic arms out, like almost emulating the crucifix.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he was able to play with the idea. Maybe he wasn't fully sure that actual photo shoot would define his image.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that was a female photographer that did that.
I know the pictures you're talking about, but if we're trying to analyze who and what was in the real Jim Morrison,
yeah,
in my little world,
yeah.
and other people have much more knowledge than I do,
yeah.
I would describe it as an upbringing that was filled with anger and shame of his father. At his last concert, before he fled to France, his mother waited in the vestibule for him to come out to be with her son, and he went out the back door and refused to meet with her. So he was a deeply disturbed young man, family-wise, and the escape of starting with vodka, then turning to other stimulants was an escape. It's a classic example of escapism.
But escape from what? Like, what demons did he have? Not saying that you knew him personally, but what do you think he did? Because he did, you know, through his lyrics were really heavy. You know, from the end, as you said, when he talks about the whole ancestral thing, or even to Unknown Soldier, where he kind of, once again, is tied to a stick, like emulate the crucifix, and bleeding with his sheepskin jacket on. I thought it was a very strong image again. So, as much as he was in control of his art, was the management and Elektra Records, were they just part of the machine to push him out and sell him in an image to where the market was, which was and still is teenage girls?
Well, I'm not sure I'm fully qualified to answer that.
No, you're not. No one is, but as I say, it's just a
my gut reaction was Elektra Records saw him fill in a vacuum.
Yeah.
He had the appearance, he had Mansurek on the keyboard, probably was the backbone of the whole group. They had a unique opportunity to promote somebody that was in need of at the time, who the public needed at the time, and the public needed this persona at the time. If you look at most of them, they all had a different contribution. For example, when I read about the causes, Jim Morrison really didn't identify. When he was seen on the stage, he wasn't seen as a Joan Baez. He was seen as an entertainer. But when you read his poetry and listen to his songs, he was probably the greatest disciple of anti-war, of racism and sexism that you can imagine. When you read his poetry, but no one did read it at the time. And that's what led to his frustration and his incident in Miami and his incident of fleeing to France and his overdosing and the whole thing. That's how I read him.
Okay, all right. That's
extremely complex character.
Yeah, yeah. But a very intelligent one as well.
Obviously.
Like two things that kind of, especially when you look at what's happening now in relation to music and media, like I think he definitely coined it, the phrase, whoever controls the media controls the mind. And that's an amazing thing to say, because where we are now, the media is definitely controlling the mind.
Well, that's the line that he uses in The Unknown Soldier. Just one line.
Yeah.
Wait until the war is over and we're both a little older, the unknown soldier. I'm paraphrasing. Children having their cornflakes at breakfast.
Yeah.
Breakfast where the news is read. Television children fed. So all of what they were getting, they were being fed from the media.
Yeah.
Unborn living dead. Bullet strikes the helmet's head. I mean, that was the thing against Vietnam, that one line.
Yeah.
So deep writer. What makes great poets, and this is a silly statement, but what makes great poets is what they leave to the listener to imagine in the theatre of the mind.
Yeah.
They don't come out and feed you righteousness against evil.
Yeah.
They come out and they give you the clues to what you should consider in order to reach your own conclusions. And each of those lines in what I read, I would suggest, were much more prophetic and much more effective than maybe the Joan Baez's, who you expected it from them.
But as you said as well, like, you know, words resemble, words be quick, words resemble walking sticks. Plant them, they will grow. Watch them waver, so I'll always be a word man, better than a bird man. So, yeah, he was very sure of what he wanted to be. And he would have studied all the great poets as well, so he knew.
He did.
He was a student of poetry.
He was a student too of Socrates and Plato and what have you.
Even his hairstyle was of Alexander the Great, so he knew mythology and history, and he was very well read. And I suppose, as I said earlier on, one of the travelling companions he had was on the road with Jack Kerouac, and that kind of gave him the impetus. And most of America was alive with that kind of urgency and getting on the road and going out to look for America, as Paul Simon said in later year. But, you know, so there was a lot of excitement. So that must have been amazing, though, when you contextualise it. At the time, they were just another travelling band, and who didn't turn up for the fourth gig. You actually have a reference there, do you? Or an email you got. You tried to sue them, was it?
Oh yeah, when they didn't show up for the fourth gig, I found a lawyer in the town, and I sued. Well, let me find it here, if we can find it. Ask me something else while I'm looking.
But you didn't sue them out of
sued
bitterness or malice. It was just malice that you had to.
I sued them for non-fulfillment of a contract.
Yeah.
Because they signed up for 4.
Right.
And they only showed up for 3. And the reason they didn't show up for the 4th one was because they were now into big bucks and audiences in the thousands.
Oh yeah, I know.
It's there somewhere.
It's there somewhere. So, but it's an interesting document that you still have. Definitely something that weren't holding on to. Do you want to just give us another poem from Jim Morrison
Well, I haven't given you one yet, have I?
Oh no, you quoted from the
quoted,
Soldier, so
well,
do you want to continue with that or another one?
Well, let's do Strange Days.
Yes, please.
Strange days have found us. Strange days have tracked us down. They're going to destroy our casual joys. We shall go on playing or find a new town. Yea. Strange eyes fill strange rooms. Voices will signal they're tired, and the hostess is grinning. Her guests sleep from sinning. Hear me talk of sin, and you know this is it. Yea. Strange days have found us, and through their strange hours we linger alone, bodies confused, memories misused, as we run from the day to a strange night of stone. that's pretty powerful stuff if you take each line and analyse it.
As what he wanted to do,
As
a poet would have liked.
as to how he was feeling.
Yeah.
But he didn't come out with peace signs and saying flowers in your hair. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. He was deep. He's a
Absolutely.
deep artist, deep man, complex.
Let me just reread. I know it's the first time I say, if I read it before, stop me. The Unknown Soldier.
Yeah.
Wait until the war is over and we're both a little older. The Unknown Soldier. I mean, let me just stop there. Right away, you know that the unknown soldier is never going to get older because of the wastefulness of war. That's my last commentary. Now I'll continue it. Breakfast where the news is read, television children fed, unborn living, living dead, bullet strikes the helmet's head. And it's all over. For the unknown soldier, it's all over. For the unknown soldier. Company, halt, present arms. Make a grave for the unknown soldier, nestled in your hollow shoulder, the unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television children fed, bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over. The war is over, it's all over. War is over. It's all over, baby. All over, baby. Oh, over, yay, yay. All over, baby. Whoa, ha, ha, ha. All over. All over, baby. Oh, hoo, yay. All over, hey. I mean, if you want words in my mind when I read it, and I've read it many times in the last years, it's a roundabout way of saying the madness of a bullet in the helmet.
Yeah.
I mean, that describes war.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't need to go into blood and guts. Earlier you were talking about the media. I mean, Walter Cronkite, the great, one of the great American CBS commentators, said our job is not to go out and report on airplanes that land on time and 18-wheel trucks make it through Times Square without hitting an old woman. Our job is to talk about planes that crash and old women who get run over. The media at the time, if it bled, it led. If it bled, it led. Yeah. And the war in Vietnam only started coming to an end when I earlier talked about bodies coming home to Porterville, California, a little farming community, something like 8 bodies in a 3-month period. That's for the first time, along with the famous picture of the naked girl running in Vietnam away from the napalm. Yeah. That is when middle America started sitting up and saying this has to stop. And in a strange way, if people ever say protests don't count, I've often thought that the protests against the Vietnam War had really little effect, even though Johnson wouldn't run again and Nixon was to resign. I'm not sure the protests had an enormous effect. I think, and this may be totally wrong, but I think the war ended because America finally saw it couldn't win it. And what was going on in the streets was good for, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, but public opinion was against the war in Vietnam. Is that why they stopped it?
Public opinion after the bodies came back to Porterville began to slowly change.
Right.
And all of a sudden, people in the high ranks of government across the planet started speaking out.
Yeah.
And
yeah, strange days in relation to what I captured it. And we're in serious strange days now. You talked about that young Vietnamese girl with the napalm across her naked body. That was actually banned from social media because it was a naked child. So do you understand? They completely missed the realization of war that Morrison was trying to convey through his words, and then an actual image of a victim of war was in 2016. That photo was banned on social media because the girl was naked.
Well, we don't have to go back then. You can go back about 5 years ago here in Dalkey.
The strange days.
Yes, strange. In Dalkey, I was going to give a talk in the library here on the 60s in America. And I used that picture, and they said it was too controversial, so they made me change it.
Really? The same picture about the young girl?
Yeah, it's the same picture of the young girl running naked.
Oh. Away from war.
Away from, and this is 5 or 6 years ago in Dalkey.
Yeah. I was at that time, yeah.
The library thought it was too controversial.
Wow.
I mean, we haven't
Reality
changed.
is too controversial.
We haven't changed.
We've got worse.
The peace movement hasn't had any victories.
No.
One of the reasons, whether it's drugs or war, is it takes a long-term commitment to make change. When Barack Obama said, yes we can, that was utter nonsense.
Attitude.
He should have said, yes we can, if we organise.
Yeah.
But people in the Western Hemisphere are not prepared to make personal sacrifices to organise. Long term. They like the moment of glory and the moment of excitement, but not long term. I've talked about all of my adult life about long term solutions, whether it's full employment by law. If you're unemployed, you're likely 84% of the people in American jails were unemployed when they went in. Direct correlation. Nobody wants to hear that because the unions and management wouldn't want it. The unions wouldn't want full employment by law because there'd be less need to join a union. Management don't want it because workers could leave their job without any repercussions and pick up another job. So whether it's full employment by law, decriminalising illegal drugs and making them regulated and controlled and distributed without charge is long-term thinking. But if you want to get rid of the cartels, you have to do long-term thinking. There's no good just setting up head shops. There's no good just setting up free needle distribution. They're only a band-aid, if even a band-aid. But it takes, I don't know what the word is finally, but not to say that I have, but it takes courage to plan long-term, and it takes patience.
Well, like Morrison, in to bring it back to what I take on board exactly what you're saying, but he kind of had a long term, even though he kind of burnt out rather than faded away. That wasn't his agenda. His agenda was to kind of do something because he was inspired by the people around him.
He didn't shove it down your throat.
Yeah, but
he let you think and rationalise.
But he was a forward thinker.
Absolutely.
And he had a long-term plan.
Absolutely.
Like even when talking about music, he says the future of music.
Yes.
And you can watch this on YouTube. The future of music is one guy pressing a button. That was it. Like, you know, he was thinking beyond the DJ, and that's exactly where it is now, because everything is sampled and mixed, you know, and originality is not promoted at all. And I'm sure if he was interviewed in more depth, they would have got more out of him. But he had an avenue with his poetry, and as you say, it is deep, it's all there, and you need to read it every so often. So 50 years after his death, like, his legacy, well, what should it be as far as you're concerned?
His legacy for 2021 should be, if you want to make change, you have to have long-term planning. And as you've heard many times, when an original idea comes up, the first time it's condemned, the second time it's ridiculed, the third time it's totally acceptable. We have not reached the stage of acceptable on major problems. As I said, I don't know, because of our interview, I don't know if it's relevant to say it again, but the war machine will never stop until factories stop producing missiles to bullets. Never. Because when those storehouses get filled with missiles, they have to empty out the storehouse in order to continue the present jobs And in order to empty out the storehouses, they have to find Saudi Arabia, who recently bought $7 billion worth of American armaments.
Yeah.
So we have an armament industry. We have an armament set mind of thinking. And until it comes back to jobs. The interesting thing, let me just say a final words on full employment by law. That's easy to talk about. If I had my way, I'd lower the work week to 4 days. So I've come up with a new word, ERCLA. It's derived from work and leisure. There's no good lowering the work week to 4 days and thereby creating more jobs unless you educate and train people how to spend their leisure time. So what we need to do is promote the arts, promote everything from basket weaving to needle working to, let me tell you, in my last few months of my first campaign for Congress, there was a convention held in the northern part of the district in Mariposa County. People from all over America who were members of a barbed wire group. They collected strands of barbed wire. And people said, Lavery, what the hell are you doing going up to spending 2 days up in Mariposa County? They're not even in your district and they wouldn't vote for you if they knew you anyway. And I said, no, there's something beautiful going on up there. There was about 1,500 people from all over the America had come to this little mountain town and they all had one thing in common, parenthesis, great self-esteem from collecting different brands of barbed wire. So in order to have full employment, you have to train people how to spend leisure time. So you train people to do all of the arts. And ironically, out of doing that, you'll create jobs by the manufacturers of the paintbrushes. Not very brilliant, common sense.
Yeah.
You're going to change jobs that they don't have to work in the missile factory and they can go out and work in the yacht factory, building yachts for people to sail or canvases to paint on.
Yeah. Or venues to play in.
Or venues to play on with fair wages.
Studios. Where they can be going around to schools and saying, this is a piece of art. You cannot steal it. No more than you can go into a shop and steal a loaf of bread. You have to pay because other people paid to get this art out. And that's it. It's education, really, essentially. And Morrison, you know, he was very well educated, very interested in what he was reading, and very interested in how he developed his art. And he started off as a university student in UCLA doing cinema, same class as Francis Ford Coppola.
Right.
So he was always on that trajectory, but he was taken down in 27, and we're literally going to have to wrap this up now before we run out of tape again, which we did the last time. And
you know how they started, don't you?
No, on Venice Beach.
On Venice Beach.
Yeah, that was the one part of the movie that everyone was happy with. That actually did happen.
Well, for your listeners who may not know, the story is he was sitting. Ray Manstrick was sitting there, and Jim Morrison walks by, and Manstrick says, "What are you doing?" They're at film school in the university, and he says, "Why don't we start a band?"
And started talking about Blake.
The rest is history.
Yeah, and his poetry, and the rest is history. But that's it. That's how the history has led us to talking about something that happened in Venice Beach, which was monumental in relation to rock and roll. So, and I just want to finish on a Jim Morrison kind of, not a Jim Morrison quote or a song or a poem, but just from someone that was just dealing with him as a person back then.
He was introverted. I never told you that. He was extremely introverted.
Okay, yeah. So he was extroverted on stage. That's where he became alive.
When I would converse with him,
like a real poet,
I had to start the conversation.
Yeah, okay.
And rightly so, because he was a big shot. I was just a little promoter, so I had to start the conversation. But not based on those instances. But he was extremely introverted. He was searching himself.
Yeah.
He said you can't know other people until you know yourself.
Yeah, so he was on his journey of self self understanding,
Self-which?
self awareness,
Yeah,
understanding oneself.
absolutely.
So within all that, then he knew how important he was in the whole scheme of things as an American icon, as a sex symbol.
I disagree. I don't think he ever saw himself as great because of what we talked about earlier. He saw himself
Yeah.
as a poet, but was never given the recognition of being a poet. So he was suffering from an inferiority complex.
Okay, so he would have left the band possibly on the back of the Florida situation where he was going to take out his dick to show the fans that if this is what you want, I can give it to you, but I'm not going to give it to you. And he was still brought to court, and that court case was pending when he went to France and Paris, and where he subsequently died. So that period between Florida, and there was a gig there in New Haven as well, where he had an incident with the cop, and he was arrested on stage. So that was probably also pending. So his back was against the wall, so he must have been under a lot of pressure. So I'm just thinking that in the last few months of his life, what he went through, and let's not forget that the Doors produced and released 5 albums, I think in less than 5 years, and 5 albums that stand the test of time, which is amazing.
Absolutely.
And the amount of bootlegs and other copyright ones that have made millions for everyone else. An awful lot of people have made a lot of money on the back of Jim Morrison.
I think 2 or 3 of those, at least 2, maybe 3 of those albums, in the making of them, it is now clearly shown that they were made under duress.
Duress, yeah. And then when they were given a car company wanted to do use Light My Fire, and of course that was Robbie Krieger, one of the few songs that Jim Morrison didn't write. Mm-hmm. But he was livid over it, Mm-hmm. He says, no, this is not what we're about. And maybe that could have been one of the points that drove him away to Paris as well. So there's many factors that drove him away to Paris. But I personally believe, and there's nothing to go on this, that I don't personally believe, the man is obviously possibly dead, and I don't want to be disrespectful to his family or anything, but he was also one of those people that could have disappeared, and because he was such an introvert, and to get away from everything that was eating him up, he could have literally continued on his journey from Paris to Morocco or Spain, where he loved. He could have went off, and that could have been the last of him, and he could be alive somewhere else today. Wouldn't that be? Wouldn't it be nice to think that?
Absolutely, that is. Of course, they do that with Elvis Presley, and they're all.
I know, yeah.
Even John Kennedy never really died in Dallas. He's alive and well in Corsica.
Yeah, if we didn't see his head being blown off, we would have. Right. But Elvis was kind of, but Jim Morrison, he was very upbeat when he left America, and he was beginning to find himself, and there doesn't seem to have been an association with heroin in his life, even though it was said, and he probably experimented with everything, but I think he was more misunderstood than an awful lot of his peers, for example. And just from you talking today, it's kind of given more for me as a fan to think about in relation to how more introverted he actually was, and to maybe go back and analyse his poetry a little bit more.
Well, what I said earlier, and I don't know if you have it on the tape there, but I think this to me is very important. Jim Morrison, during his years in the public eye, was not seen as a peacenik or an advocate of civil rights to a great degree. Why do I say that? Because he was too complex. He was way too. You have to study the man. You have to study his writings to understand how complex he was. But the teeny boppers who followed him weren't following him for the same reason as the anti-war people were following Joan Baez or all of the rest of them. The mamas and the papas who made their entire living out of anti-war and protests. Morrison was aloof, I would argue, from most of that. Now, what was going on in his head, we can only learn from his poetry. And I think his poetry says he was deeply disturbed that his father was a naval commander and here he was part of a military-industrial complex. I have no proof of that, but I think that was going on, and that was his hatred of his father. That word is used, and it's pretty evident it's true, even though it's a very strong word. We know, like I said, with his mother, even though he didn't hate her, but he'd little respect for her, being married to a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. So in closing, if that's what you were saying a few minutes ago, I suggest to your audience, and I may have said it already because we've gone on for quite some time, but somebody will write that PhD, and this is a plug. If I was in Trinity College or UCD or UCG or UCC or UL or Queen's, I would do my thesis on Oscar Wilde. The first half of the decade he strutted, the second half he staggered, and Jim Morrison. He strutted for a while but staggered, and we didn't know he was staggering. We knew Wilde was staggering. So I think there'd be a marvellous PhD to compare the two of them. Oscar Wilde and Jim Morrison. Maybe someday somebody will write a thesis on it. I'd love to read it.
Would you write it yourself? You had the time.
I have the time, and if I got somebody to sit down like you have patiently and listen to me, I would gladly do it. Because I've studied Oscar Wilde. I do his one-man show, The Importance of an Oscar, and I've got standing ovations even in Dublin.
Wow.
The United Arts Club, when I did it once, said Michael McLearmore lives. You don't get that from a Dublin audience unless you have hit the right buttons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anyone out there would like me to do Oscar Wilde, Michael McLearmore's The Importance of an Oscar, 91 minutes, and I'll guarantee you I'll enjoy the evening, and more importantly, you will.
Good plug.
What about our upcoming adventures? Is it still going?
Yeah, I like you just how. When it just finishing there on Oscar Wilde, how old was he when he died?
41.
41, okay. And Jim Morrison was 27.
I could be wrong on Wilde, but he's in his early 40s.
Yeah. So yeah, Morrison taken too early. However, wherever he went, but not forgotten on our 50th anniversary. So thanks very much for spending
the
time.
But let me get a plug in for something that we're all working on now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what I was leading to.
A year after I came back in 2007, I started an organisation called DIDEIRE, DIDEIRE, Decriminalise Illegal Drugs, Educate Ireland. And so finally now, because of the work of some great people who are interested in the issue, in August and September, or September alone, I'm not sure yet, we want to have a national tour of at least 8 to 12 cities and towns, not to tell people what is the truth and the light and the way about illegal drugs, but to have a conversation. And I will be the good cop, bad cop, probably the bad cop. I will advocate the decriminalization of all drugs and the distribution paid for by the government to individuals to get the drug of their choice. Why? Until you get the money out of illegal drugs, you're shoveling sand against the ocean, in my opinion.
That's coming from years of experience of teaching and looking at how America
However,
has dealt with
don't believe a word I'm saying. Go and check for yourselves. This is just one man's opinion.
Well, I think that's a good note to finish on. One man's opinion is
but
worth
check
listening
for yourself.
to. Yes, absolutely. And that's it. If you have an opinion, don't be afraid to have it. And the best thing with an opinion is other people will either agree with you or disagree with you. And we've evolved to such a way where we're not animals. That's the only thing that differentiates us from animals, our willingness to reason. So we should be able to reason with exactly what you're saying. And just on the point of what, I think that kind of summed up what Morrison was. He had something to say, and he still has.
And remember, it's an old cliche, but there's often truth in cliches. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Oh yeah, of course. I like that. Okay, Vincent. Once again, we had technical problems earlier on, and we got there in the end. So on the 3rd of July, it's a monumental day.
Ironically, tomorrow's the 4th of July.
Tomorrow's the 4th of July, Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Which I never celebrated and never could understand jingoism and waving flags.
No, but Ireland does a very good job of that. Celebrating American Independence Day, and we don't even have our own one. It's amazing. But
we go down that road next month.
We'll go down that road next month. So have a good Independence Day wherever you are. But we're going to possibly now maybe head off and look at the football.
There you go.
And,
who are you cheering for? You don't have to answer that.
No, the old enemy. I have to, obviously.
Obviously.
Better the devil you know at this stage.
And the one you don't.
But today, 3rd of July, for me, for a long time, since I became a fan of Jim Morrison 30 years ago when I was 16, and it was through Oliver Stone. I thought it was a brilliant film, very rock and rolly. I thought he was compelling. Val Kilmer who played him. But then afterwards, when I listened to the music and I realised how Ray Manzarek especially was so much against the film. I do respect Oliver Stone as a filmmaker, Born on the 4th of July, fantastic film with Tom Cruise. But I think if you're to start with The Doors, don't start with the film. Just start with Peace Frog, for example, or start with any of the albums. It's all there to be found.
Can we wind up with one of his songs? I have a DVD here with his songs.
Okay, right, brilliant.
Except it'll take me a minute or two to find it.
Okay, well, sure, if you can find it then. And I tell you what, it probably won't happen on it because it'll be flagged.
Right.
What happens with this when you put stuff online, because of copyright, it gets flagged and then the whole video is taken down. Yeah. So I think it's okay to still talk about a legend, but once we start playing his music, then we'll be taken down by the man, the machine. You know yourself.
Are you quite sure of that? You can't play a background of People Are Strange or...
No, you can't. I've tried it once or twice myself. And
you mean you got to get copyright permission?
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that, but not to the degree of...
No, it's either flagged through an algorithm or it won't, and I don't even know if that makes sense. But that seems to be how it's picked up. So, like, after getting almost 50 minutes... So we got 50 minutes of Jim Morrison on his 50th anniversary, and just the people know where the music is. This is a conversation about how he came in your path.
Yeah, we didn't have time, nor do we want to probably, but let me suggest that when you've time, read very briefly Horse Latitudes. Yeah. It's only probably 100 words.
Yeah.
But it says quite a bit, which we haven't touched on.
Yeah, but can we just then please do that? Also, I'm looking at that poster over there.
Oh yes,
so you can point to that.
This is one of the original flyers that I used for the Doors, Friday, April 7th, Merced Legion Hall, admission. It doesn't even say the admission. It'll tell you what sort of capitalist I was. I never even said how much it was. I know it was $1.75.
$1.75.
$1.75 for the Doors. And this, of course, is the picture that is worldwide used with the four of them. But let me.
And just tell me about these other posters. Then we'll finish up on the poem.
Well, do you want? Can I read this Horse Latitude thing?
Please do. 1 second now, and I'll put the camera back on its stand. Oops.
Say when.
Okay.
The name of the song is, and obviously it's almost a sacrilege just to read the words, but the reason I've always inserted reading his words rather than listen to the music is the words can become a little clearer in the listener's mind. When the still sea conspires in armour, and her sullen and aborted currents breed tiny monsters, True sailing is dead, awkward, instant. And the first animal is jettisoned, legs furiously pumping, their stiff green gallop, and heads bob up, poise, delicate, pause, consent. In mute nostril agony, carefully refined and sealed over. I ask you to read that and get your interpretation of what he said. I have mine.
Thank you very much, Vincent.
It's time for a glass of water. Cheers. Thank you very much, Johnny. You enjoyed our several hours together.
Do it again.